How do you feel about tests? If you're anything like me, your heart starts racing, your palms get sweaty, you may get flashbacks to failing report cards or endless student loan bills. I clearly didn't do well in school. Now, regardless of their GPA, I think it's safe to say that most people don't like taking tests. So what makes you think users want to participate in a user test? I bet they don't. So stick around, and we'll talk about what you can say instead. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. If you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, then I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. Not just a 5-star review, maybe a couple sentences or two. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. I am completely stoked to announce my very first monthly supporter. Chris, thank you so much for supporting the show. You're going to get a shout out at the start of each episode every week. I hope you're as excited as I am, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate the support. Thank you so much again. And if you want to join Chris and get a shout out each week, or if you just want to help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet perks for your support, like one of those fancy, shiny, holographic Beyond UX Design stickers that you've seen all over LinkedIn. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. I have a couple of quick housekeeping items to share today before we get started. First, I'm really excited to tell you about a group of self-starting UX folks over at LabCoat UX. LabCoat UX is a community built by designers for designers. You can join LabCoat UX on Discord, LinkedIn, or Facebook. They do a bunch of virtual events, and I will be joining them this Friday, February 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time to talk about UX, my personal story. I'll answer any questions you might have. Who knows what else we'll end up talking about. They're also really active on Discord. I hang out on their Discord server too, so it's also a great place to find me if you're interested in that. I have no idea what they do on Facebook because I'm not on Facebook, but if they're as active as they are on LinkedIn, then they'll be doing a lot of things that people tend to do on Facebook. I have no idea. Chris and Denicia are doing some awesome stuff over there, so please go check them out. And to find out more about that event this Friday, head over to LinkedIn and just search for LabCoat UX. They're really easy to find. A lot of you may follow me on LinkedIn, and I don't really use any other social media accounts. So LinkedIn is really where I spend the majority of my social media time. Well, about a week ago, I had my LinkedIn account suddenly restricted for the second time, and I'm not sure why. It's nearly impossible to find a person to actually talk to from LinkedIn about this. It doesn't really matter why. The big issue for me, though, is that if I do get booted from LinkedIn for good, I won't have any way to talk to all you wonderful people out there. So I did something that I thought I would never do again. I got back on Twitter after about a decade of being away. So if you're on Twitter, please follow me at jmillspaysbills and at Beyond UX Pod. I can't guarantee that my tweets will be as informative and insightful and useful as some of the stuff on LinkedIn, but I will do whatever I can with 280 characters or less. So if you're on Twitter, come and find me. We'll make it a dang old hoot. All right, so before I get into this topic today, I first want to say that I wasn't really sure about recording this episode at all because, to be perfectly upfront and honest with all of you, I am not a UX researcher. I have never gone to school to be a UX researcher. I've never been professionally trained as a UX researcher. Everything that I know about this topic I learned on the job, doing the work for the last decade or so. I've worked with a bunch of UX researchers. Some of them have been self-taught. Some have had master's degrees. Some have had PhDs. And it's been amazing to learn from all of them because they all have unique insights. So I feel pretty strongly about this topic and I wanted to talk about it. But before I did, I sent this idea of today's episode to a few UX researchers that I know, and I got unanimous feedback and they agreed about using the term quote unquote test. And they were happy that I was talking about this. So with that said, I hope you take what I'm about to talk about today and think about how your team applies that word test. All right, so we got that disclaimer out of the way. Let's get into it. So user tests. I bet you don't like tests. I bet your users don't like taking tests. Honestly, I'd be surprised if anyone actually likes taking tests. But for some reason, as UX designers, we sure do love our quote-unquote user tests. But have you ever stopped and thought about what your users hear when they hear you say it. I facilitated or observed, even participated in plenty of these sessions over the years, and in nearly all of them, the participants are somewhat nervous, right? And why wouldn't they be? This is really an uncomfortable situation for a lot of people, especially if they've never done it before. The chances are good these people have never done something like this. We ask them to complete a random task in a tool that they've likely never used. There's probably some time constraint. There's probably a few people in the room or on the call. These are likely people that they've never met. It's probably being recorded, and all eyes are right on them. Wouldn't you be nervous regardless of what you call this thing? But on top of all that, we forget all about that whole empathy for users thing, and we call it a user test. A user test. User test. These types of sessions are critical for us to understand what part of our applications are failing well before engineering teams spend all that time and money building it. It's a great opportunity to catch important issues before it turns into design debt stuck in a developer's backlog that we all know they will never actually get to. And as UX designers, I think we can all agree that these types of sessions are an important step in the product lifecycle, but what about that term, quote unquote, user test? Personally, I hate it, and I think you should stop using it. And let's break that term down to understand why I don't like it. So grammatically speaking, user test is what is called a compound noun. Specifically, it's an open compound noun, which basically means it's a single word, but there's no hyphen. So from the dictionary, which is all about, well, words, a compound is a word or word group that consists of two or more parts that work together as a unit to express a specific concept. Compounds can be formed by combining two or more words, sometimes with a hyphen, sometimes with a space. Sometimes they're combined. So in this case, if you use a space, it's open. If you use a hyphen, it's obviously hyphenated. And I'm pretty sure I've never seen a closed version of user test. All right. Here's some more examples of open compound nouns that I think is really going to stress my point. Full moon. The moon is full. Dinner table. A table for eating dinner. Coffee mug. A mug for coffee. Or more related to our point today, words with test. Driver test. Pilot test. Water test. Stress test. Light test. Hearing test. Taste test. Sniff test. Eye exam. All right, okay, I ran out of words with test, but this one still counts. In a driver test, we are testing the driver to see if they have passed the standards for getting a license. In a water test, we test the water for unwanted particles. In a stress test, we test the stress that we can apply to a specific thing to see how long it will hold. Look at all these compound words, and when you say it backwards, this is just obvious. The boots are for the snow. The board is for the snow. The shoes are for water. The ball is for tennis. The ball is for your foot. Well, sometimes it's for your hand, depending on where you live. The vehicle is electric. The bike is electric. The car is for racing. The man is a bat. The man is super. The man is a spider. The turtles are ninjas. The men are taught by Professor Xavier, which happens to start with an X. In all these cases, the first word acts as a modifier for the second word. And in all these cases, the first word tells us more details about the second word. So user test tells us what kind of test we are performing. And from a user's perspective, I hope you can see how the term quote unquote user test would imply to them at least that we are testing a user, that we're testing them. Except in our case, we're not testing the user. We are testing an interface. And aside from the obvious fact that we're putting someone in a new and likely awkward position, from their perspective, this term can imply that since we're testing users, that when our design fails, to them, they are the ones who failed. In reality, when we assign a task to the user and a user couldn't complete it, it wasn't because the user failed. It was because as UX designers, we failed the user. And look, I barely passed English class. I'm definitely not a grammar Nazi. So the cursory research that I did to even realize that this was a compound noun could be totally wrong. And normally, I am the last person to get hung up on semantics. And the fact that I'm being so pedantic about this should stress how much of an issue I think this really is. You likely won't be hearing me complain about a specific word like this again anytime soon. But the fact is, even if all of this grammar stuff that I talked about is just a bunch of bullshit, it doesn't matter. Because when you tell a user you're going to have them participate in a quote-unquote user test, their perception of the situation is the reality for them. If they think you're testing them, then you've already skewed the results, especially if they're nervous because they don't like taking tests. Okay, so maybe I've convinced you, and now you're asking, well, that's great, Jeremy. What do I say instead? Well, let's think about what we're actually doing. We're not really asking anyone to take a test. The results from these sessions are often not a simple pass-fail. The results are often more nuanced. We're often comparing the results of many sessions, and we're studying the results of different participants before we make a final decision on what to do one way or another. So the results of many sessions influence what decision we decide to take. We may not do anything. We may have found that a piece of the software scored low, but for one reason or another, we're going to leave it. So we're not passing or failing. We're studying the usability based on the varying results of many participants over a period of time. Some things we will change and some things we may not. So what we're doing is we're studying the usability of our product. And I've shared this idea with some folks, and I've gotten some feedback on this idea of using the word test, and some people have said that they are sometimes actually giving a pass-fail score to some specific component or feature. So in that case, they would be considering that a quote-unquote test. And to that, I would say, yeah, sure, but you're still not testing the user. So maybe that's not a study, but call it what it is. Maybe a component validation or feature validation or even feature testing or something, but not user test. Now, again, I am not one to be super pedantic when it comes to things like this. I don't really care what you call this thing. I just want you to stop saying user test. Call it usability study. Call it feature validation. Say you're validating with users. I don't care. Lastly, I do want to note that while I am saying call it whatever you want, we should stress the importance of the scientific method here. It's critical that your team writes a research plan and a script so that this type of activity is repeatable and comparable across many facilitators and subjects. So even though I'm saying call it a study or call it validation, it's important that everyone on your team uses the same language so that this type of thing is repeatable and done on a regular basis in the same way, so that you're getting accurate results that can be compared across a given set. Because ultimately, you need to get the best data that you can to make the best decision that you can for your product and your users. So next time you want to validate your work with users, show me how much empathy you really have for your users and just stop calling it a user test. Well, all right, y'all, I think that's it for me for today. I hope to help you and your team think a little bit more deeply about the language that we use and how we might affect a user. What words does your team use to describe this kind of activity? Do you call them a user test? Have you noticed your users reacting negatively towards the word test, or have they not noticed at all? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. And if you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. Not just 5-star review, I'm talking a couple sentences too. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, I would love it if you told them about it. That'd be fantastic. And if you want to help keep the show independent and ad-free, check out the new Patreon sponsor packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can support the show for as little as $3 a month, and there are some awesome perks like a fancy holographic Beyond UX Design sticker. You can get a shout out on the show every week, and there's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX than design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.